everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we're here for episode 3.4, season 3, episode 4. Rod, my man, how you doing? You've been busy, haven't you?
Oh gosh, have I been busy? Yes. I've been blowing going, as we say on my book. I'm actually making progress. I'm about 50% through, but it's really coming together now. And I'm celebrating today with a glass of beer because A, I've gotten a lot of work done, and
Sure.
B, today is the feast day of St. Bridget of Ireland.
Oh, nice.
An early medieval Irish wonder worker, one of the patron saints of Ireland. She's known for having turned water into beer.
Dude, that's just, of course
Isn't
she's
that
the
awesome?
patron. Of course she's the patroness of Ireland. Yeah, here stateside, of course, Irish Americans, of course, default to St. Patrick, which is really kind of an American Irish phenomena.
Is it?
Not as big of a deal in Ireland, from what my Irish friends tell me. So I think St. Bridget is the OG saint for Ireland, and
Well,
that she would turn water to beer. I mean, that's pretty
isn't that
special.
awesome? Well,
That is.
I found out about that today was her day from reading Paul Kingsnorth's Substack.
Okay.
He lives in Western Ireland, and
Mhm.
um, in a couple days I'll be going to visit Paul.
Oh,
And
nice. Really? I did not know that. That's great.
yeah, I'm going to spend a few days there and interview him for my book, and so I'm looking forward to it. We've never met,
I
and
I also didn't know that. That's so funny. Oh, great. Well, that's
yeah,
what a great opportunity.
such an interesting guy,
Yeah.
and so I'm looking forward to it. And Paul, thinking about Ireland, I'll be looking forward to seeing what he has to say about this.
Mhm.
But another Irish person I talked to, a Catholic priest who's an exorcist, told
Yeah.
me that he believes that Ireland is going to repaganize.
Yeah.
I mean, it's walked away from the Catholic faith now, but he believes that there won't be a vacuum there for very long. Said the Irish will, in his view, it's just his own people he's talking about,
Yeah.
that they're going to find a way to go back to worship the old pagan gods, but they'll find a cutesy poo new age way of justifying it. And
Hmm.
I got to say, I think he's right,
Hmm.
but it's also the case that there's a huge move in our popular culture
Hmm.
towards the occult and paganism as becoming a replacement religion. And I hope we can talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's kind of been on my brain, which was interesting because I woke up this morning and I was actually been reading Paradise Lost and Romeo and Juliet at the same time with my two classes, and for whatever reason, I've been thinking about your project of enchantment, and sort of these patterns that you and I talk a bit about. And I was exchanging some Twitter DMs with a friend of mine, a priest friend of mine, and we were sort of talking about enchantment and the buffered self and the porous self. These are phrases from Charles Taylor's that a
Mhm.
secular age, which is of course in completely in keeping with the work that you and I have been talking about that you've actually been writing on. And so I just kind of had this on the brain, and then lo and behold, you pop this sort of a big blog post on the American Conservative. Link is right below here in the show notes, kind of about this. And you were riffing on a Ross Douthat piece, weren't you? So tell me a little bit about this repaganization, and then if you could add that a question to that is, um, what do you make of the rapidity of the this paganization
Mhm.
process that we're seeing?
Yeah. Well, Ross Douthat at the New York Times, who is a Catholic, wrote a piece about how, in this time of great spiritual chaos, destabilization,
Mhm.
there are a lot of people who are trying new ways out to find new forms of spirituality. And
Mhm.
some of them are going towards the occult, he says, and others are going into psychedelic drugs,
Mhm.
DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, things like that, seeking an experience of the numinous, of spiritual fireworks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, that's not really news, although I
Mhm.
think it may be news to older listeners. Um, but what's news, and what a point that I think Ross makes very well in his piece, is that there's this baseline assumption among a lot of Americans that the spirit world is benign, if
Mhm.
not positive, then at least benign. And
Mhm.
Ross points out, first of all, Christians are forbidden from dabbling in this stuff, though many do.
Mhm.
But even if you're not a Christian, Ross points out that there's nothing in history and the lore of these worlds from the traditional cultures that say, oh, go have fun, go on a
Right.
little tour, it'll be fine. In fact, it can be really, really dangerous. And the reason that Ross's column really jazzed me is because, as you say, I've been doing this kind of work, and I'm one of the chapters of my book is on what I call negative enchantment,
Yeah.
which is to say, people who are understandably seeking a sense of spiritual, a real spiritual life, and even miracles, signs, wonders, things like that. I totally get that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But they're going down some really dangerous roads. And one of the in my blog post, I quoted at length an ex-occultist I interviewed in the U.S. He's an academic, but he also had not only was he deeply involved in the occult. I mean, he calls himself a demon worshiper. That's what he
Yeah.
was. He's a Christian now. Not only was he deeply involved in the occult, but heavy use of psychedelic drugs was
Hmm.
part of his worship practice. And man, the stories he told me about the things that he and his colleagues did will literally scare the hell out of you. And
Yeah.
I can't really talk about that yet
Yeah.
because I haven't negotiated with him about which of that I can use, but I did put on the blog some things I definitely can use. Just him talking about how so many Americans, especially younger ones, are just drawn into this out
Hmm.
of curiosity and
Hmm.
experience, and they don't have any breaks. They don't have a tradition that tells them, no, 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 don't go there, don't go
Hmm.
there.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really struck by that, right? I mean, we know that there are no those breaks, as you say, the breaks are no longer really in place. Um, but what do you make of the thirst or the hunger for these kind of experiences? I mean, because on the one hand, you think of sort of our world as being sort of hyper rationalistic, hyper materialist, and kind of anti-spiritual, and yet we have this sort of flip side of the coin that we have all these people seeking these kinds of
Mhm.
experiences. I think you and I might say naively.
Yeah.
But what do you attribute this to, Rod?
Yeah. Well, I think that on probably at the base level, you can attribute it to boredom,
Mm,
but I think
mm,
there's something serious and valid in the more serious seekers.
hmm. Hmm.
They are completely secularism, consumerism, all the features of our materialist culture. It doesn't satisfy them.
Right,
I
right.
interviewed last year when I went to Romania to a monastery, Orthodox monastery there. I interviewed a monk who does a lot of spiritual counseling, and he said that it's just overwhelming what he sees in young people in their 20s. They're so depressed, so
Sorry.
lonely, so uh, un, uh, unfulfilled. And he said, this is the world we live in today. He said he was like that too at that age.
Right,
He's
right.
42 now, but there's something about the culture we live in now, a hole that it's a God-shaped hole, as I like to say.
Right.
And I think it's also the case that so much contemporary Christianity just ain't cutting it.
Right. Good. Yeah, 'cause that's sort of the other side of that coin, I think, that is so important for you to sort of bring out. Right. That
yeah,
that
well, the ex-occultist, I call him Will in my piece. It's not his
Mhm.
real name.
Mhm.
He was raised evangelical, and he
Mm,
said that
mm,
there was just
mm,
nothing there for him. He was a really intelligent guy who had lots of questions, and he found no answers.
mm,
And nobody really knew what to tell him about this. And so he said, "Then clearly don't know what they're talking about." That's what he
mm.
decided as a teenager. So he started doing reading, and got sucked into New Age, then esotericism, and
Yeah.
eventually full blown occultism.
Right, right.
Also, just before we connected, Kale, I was processing an interview I did with this guy named um, uh, Joseph Frangipani. He's now an Orthodox deacon, but I think he must be now in his early 40s. But
Mhm.
he had been raised Catholic in suburban Oregon, I think it was, somewhere on the West Coast.
Okay.
Suburban Catholicism just left him so cold. And
Sure.
a self-hypnosis class in high school got him into
Oh,
meditation and then into
wow.
yoga. And man, he
Wow.
just was on fire for all kinds of Eastern
Mhm,
religious and New Age
mhm,
experiences, got heavily into the occult,
mhm.
ended up as a young man leaving his girlfriend and going to India in search of something, in
Yeah.
search of this experience.
Right.
And he ended up in a cave outside a town at the top of the Ganges. Yeah, in fact, I might even put
This
this.
is so like archetypal or something. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I mean, he's a true seeker. And while he was in the cave praying, just trying to figure out, what do I do? What do I do? He started to say the Jesus prayer. I
Wow.
said, wait a minute. The
What?
Jesus prayer.
Yeah.
You weren't, how did you learn that? Well, he had been working, I think he said, in an occult bookstore somewhere in Oregon, and earlier in his life, and they had a copy of The Way of the Pilgrim, a
Of
19th
course.
century
Yeah.
Russian classic
I
about the
have.
Jesus
Yeah, I
prayer. He
have it
doesn't
back
know,
here.
yeah, he doesn't know why it was there, but it was, and it just, he learned the Jesus prayer there, and he said he began to say the Jesus prayer, and he had some kind of mystical experience. When he woke up the next day, there were two like scary dogs outside his cave. And he's terrified of dogs. He said he began to say the Jesus prayer and they backed off. The
Whoa.
more he would say the Jesus prayer, the more they would back off. Anyway, he came back to America and ended up converting to Orthodoxy. And now he's an Orthodox deacon. The reason I even bring him up, Kale, is
Yeah.
because it's a classic story of an intelligent, spiritually sensitive young American who was raised in a form of American Christianity, but it was nothing but land moralism,
Yeah.
let's be nice.
Yeah. What is it? It's nice to be nice to the nice. As my priest friend always jokes about the sort of the ethos of modernity, or moralistic therapeutic deism, to be
Yeah,
more clear, right? Um, so I'm struck by this. We have talked about this before, Rod, but I haven't quite thought of it in this register that you're talking about it right now. In fact, 2 episodes we talked about the experience machine. And it seems to be a theme that is recurring in our conversations, that part and parcel of a sort of a genuine spirituality, an incarnate spirituality, has something to do, and perhaps more to do with experience than kind of, we might call simple rationality. I wonder if you could sort of say a little bit more about
sure.
the primary role of experience in what you've been looking into.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because this is so huge. There's a book called The Dawn of Christianity by a Berkeley historian named Robert Knapp, Knapp. Oh, you've got it. You've
I
got
just
it.
got it. I literally just got it. Yeah, I just got it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
I don't get the idea that he's a religious person.
yeah,
He's a historian.
yeah,
And he talks about how at the beginning of Christianity in the Greco-Roman Empire, everybody was into magic. I mean, this was just part of life. They didn't have this concept back
yeah,
then of the difference between the supernatural and the natural. It was all one. And this,
yeah,
by the way, I should say, this is how Orthodox Christianity still sees it today.
yeah.
But anyway, this was the world into which Christianity was born. And Knapp says that the sort of the philosophical discourse, or maybe even a low level evangelical discourse,
Mhm.
didn't convert most people. What converted people in those early days was miracles, signs,
Dude,
wonders, and
this is so
miracles.
weird because I literally, because I'm a Twitter degenerate. I'm literally, prior to us coming on to record this morning or this afternoon or whatever time it is, I was just in a Twitter thread conversation with a bunch of people, and I was saying exactly that the miracles are the point. Like it's not an argument.
Yeah,
It's like the inadequacy of apologetics. I mean, apologetics is great if you're looking for reasons for the already converted, but apologetics, you can't
yeah,
argue your way into this. It makes no sense. So,
exactly.
so keep going. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. Well, so what Knapp says is that the world of the early Christians
Mhm.
was a lot like when, and as we know from the Old Testament, Elijah confronted the priest of Baal, and he
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
prove that his God was more powerful than their God. Well, this was the sort of thing that converted the Greco-Roman pagans, the early pagans. And that does a really good job of bringing out how difficult it was for a pagan to leave and become a Christian.
yeah.
Because first of all, if you had to put aside your entire concept of reality, now in if Christianity had been one new religion among all the others, there would have been
Mhm.
no problem. They could have just added Jesus to the pantheon of the
Right,
gods, like Hinduism. But Christianity didn't allow that. It was monotheistic. It said you're
right,
either going to be Christian or not. You
right,
can't have it both
right,
ways.
right.
So to be a Christian, to convert from paganism to Christianity required an enormous sacrifice of your family. They might not want to talk to you. You would have to turn your back on the psychological order that had given you a sense of reality prior to that time. And as we see in Acts chapter 19, you had to turn against the economic order. In Acts 19,
Right, right.
it talks
It,
about Paul in Ephesus.
yeah.
And there was it tells a story of a silversmith in Ephesus, which was a big pilgrimage town. The Temple of Artemis was there. It was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. There was a big economy on pilgrims, worshipers of Artemis coming there. They would buy these little silver idols and go as memorials or souvenirs, or they would go offer them at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big part of the local economy. Well, the Christians were going to screw all that up because they were saying you can't worship Artemis and worship Jesus. It's Jesus or nothing. And so in Acts 19, we see that Demetrius silversmith tries to organize a pogrom against the
That's right. That's right.
It's true.
Yeah.
And anyway, the point that Nat brings out is it was huge. So for somebody to leave paganism, Greco-Roman paganism, to become a Christian, they had to believe that there was a greater power there. Right. And this is why you read in Acts that Paul and the disciples, they get there, they're casting out demons, they're healing people. Acts 19 records like the power of the Holy Spirit in St. Paul was so great that people were touching garments or pieces of cloth to him and then taking them out and healing people. That's the sort of thing that made converts. Nap even talks about how Celsus, the pagan philosopher Celsus, who was a big opponent of the early Christians, he said that this is how they're winning people. Their magic is stronger. And Origen, who is Celsus's great opponent, conceded as much. Funny, as I'm bringing that up, Kale, I'm remembering a conversation I had a couple of years ago. I was out in Sacramento giving a talk about the Benedict option and live not by lies. And I talked to a Protestant woman, the wife of a pastor, who said that she used to be with a group of other evangelicals who would go out to Burning Man. And they wouldn't go there.
Yes. This is great. Yeah. I mean, go. This is great.
Yeah. And they didn't like fly their Christian flag. They would just go there and offer prayer for people. They set up a tent among all the other tents. Yeah. And they got big crowds. And the reason why they found out was because the word was getting around that their magic is stronger. These people were the people went to Burning Man were so de-Christianized, they didn't even know what they were dealing with. All they knew is that the magic that those people who call themselves Christians had was stronger. Wow. And tarot card readers, psychics, and others around them got really mad because the Christians were stealing their business. The woman even said that some people came to them and they said, well, how'd you know how to find us? Because it was a huge, sprawling encampment. She said, oh, when we came in the front gate, there was like a light hovering over your tent. Wow. So anyway, I bring all that up to say that this was what the early church was about. This is how they established themselves. I think, Kale, that we're now in a time when that's the only kind of thing that's going to drag people out of this fog and malaise of secularism and hedonism and occultism.
So, okay, good. So now, how are you sort of processing, Ross's piece that you were speaking of earlier talks about the unwillingness or the seeming unwillingness for people, in our milieu to not take this sort of spiritual stuff all that seriously, right? So he has these sort of three groups, the kind of group that this is real, but it's kind of fun, or I'm not sure if it is real, but who knows what it is. And then you've got the group that are sort of experimenting with psychedelics, as your friend Will was talking about. And then you've got this sort of the statue of Hava. So how are you seeing all this?
Well, it's all about the steady and increasing paganization of our post-Christian culture. One of the things that Will, quote unquote, the ex-occultist said, and this is a guy who is also an academic who studies this stuff. He said that one of the things that when he was in the occult as part of a cult, one of the things they used to laugh about was how naive Christians were and
Yes.
Americans were about
Yes.
all this. He said that we occultists knew that pop culture was on our side. There were so many occult themes in pop culture, and it got sold to the normies by being about female empowerment. All this
Hmm.
witchy stuff,
Hmm.
female empowerment.
Yeah.
We see in New Orleans right now, for
Oh,
example, they've at the former Lee Circle, where a statue of Robert E. Lee was on top of a
hmm.
pillar. They took that down during the Black Lives Matter thing. And now they've just put up, I think it's only going to be for a few months, but they put up this pagan statue of an African goddess, a woman with like a spoon head and
And a
a
snake or
snake.
something. Yeah.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
And it is openly an African goddess. The
Yeah.
sculptor said that. Um, this is not neutral. And I can
Yeah.
imagine, they're selling this. Looked at the press release and they're saying, oh, it's all about honoring the tradition of
Sure.
New Orleans, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Fine. I get that. And it's all about taking a stand against white supremacy. It's also an occult goddess, a pagan
Right.
goddess.
Right.
Also, and Ross points this out, he doesn't bring up the New Orleans thing, but he points out in New York, a Pakistani American
Right.
sculptor
Right.
has put up two statues, one in Madison Square Park and a very similar version of the same female goddess, like a non-specific goddess, on top of the New York Supreme Court building in
Right.
Manhattan. And
Next to what two statues, Rod?
I don't know what Moses and
Moses and somebody else. But anyway, so
Muhammad, maybe a
it's an interesting
lawgiver.
statement about
Right.
this, isn't it? Right.
Well, it is, and the I think the one in the Manhattan on the courthouse building is going to be permanent. The
Yeah.
sculptor talks about it's a woman. She says, "Oh, it's about female empowerment and about fighting the pro-life bigots and blah blah blah." And you know, this is a proclamation of a new spiritual order. If you go back, Kale, and read the accounts. I talk all the time about the book, The Final Pagan Generation
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
Edward Potts, but
Yeah.
there are other historical accounts of what happened in the fourth century in the Greco-Roman world. That was a century in which the old religious order, Greco-Roman paganism, was decisively overthrown. And the pagans, according to the historian, they didn't know what was happening.
Hmm.
But you could see what was going on because the Christians, as they grew in power, they didn't want to tolerate pagan statues and pagan this and pagan that in the public square. And once they got political power, they used that political power to demolish a lot of this stuff. Well, now the reverse is happening to Christians, and
Hmm.
so many normie Christians are just like the pagan elites back then. They think that, oh, well, it's this is doesn't make us happy, but it's
Hmm.
going to be fine. It's not going to be fine.
Hmm.
It's not.
Yeah. As I think about this construct, the one that you paint for us here, I'm I'm struck by the sense, maybe, I don't know what you think about this, but that there is a kind of default reality, spiritual reality, that is not the sort of the rosy, happy, clappy, rainbows and sunshine that we would we would prefer to believe. But there's a kind of a ruthless sort of spiritual overlay or underlay
Yeah,
to our reality, and that Christianity, it's sort of its genius in one way was to chase all of that away, right, and to carve
right.
out a kind of stay against spiritual confusion in a quite a profound way.
Yeah,
um and I think in some sense we are victims of our own success, culturally speaking. Here I'm talking about,
that's right.
if we think about the West, if we think about Christendom and the West as a kind of project. I'm thinking here of Tom Holland, but I'm also thinking here of Charles Taylor, that we have become so successful in chasing away the spiritual because of our plugging into the kind of DNA of creation. And I'm talking here, of course, post-Enlightenment scientific revolution stuff that we've been able to exert. We have been able to, in the Cartesian phrase, become masters and possessors of creation. It is given us a little bit of a delusional comfort in thinking that matter is just
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
And but a lot of that has been done because Christianity has sort of cleared out a space with which we can kind of do this. But now that Christianity is clearly, and this is not, Rod and Kale doing the sky is falling routine, like clearly Christianity is in rapid descent
Yeah. The sky is falling. It
yeah,
actually
right.
is.
Yeah, right. I mean, fair. But in other words, I mean, the influence of actual lived experiential Christianity
Hmm.
is in such recession that it's not a vacuum. Like, something will fill that space that has been crowding it out. The image that I have in my head, Rod, and this might make you chuckle as being a fellow Louisianian, is the Louisiana, certainly South Louisiana, is so it is habitable land because of the force of the Mississippi River keeping the Gulf of Mexico from coming into the land, right?
Hmm.
So that if we think about the sort of the force of the Mississippi River as sort of the force of Christianity that kind of keeps these spirits at bay, imagine if we could stop the flow of the Mississippi River. Well, South Louisiana would cease to exist. It would be Atlantis. Right. So in a similar way, Christianity has sort of been this force that has kept the sort of the darker elements of the spiritual realities kind of at bay. But as soon as that recedes,
Right.
it's going to come right back in,
Right.
right?
And I think that, when you talk about the force, I think many people would hear you assume that Christianity as a cultural force,
No, I
which
mean
is,
really. I mean, right.
no, I no, 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 no. But it is a cultural force. But I think, I don't think I know that it's actually a real spiritual force.
Mhm.
The words bring to mind a conversation. Maybe I mentioned it here before, but a conversation I had a few years ago in a taxi cab in Boston. My driver picking me up at the airport, taking me to where I was going, was a Haitian
Mhm.
and a Haitian immigrant. And I could tell he was playing Christian music. I could tell he was a Christian, like an
Mhm.
evangelical Christian.
Mhm.
And I told him I was a Christian too. And we just got to talking and on the long ride. And he told me that he came to America in part to get away from the demonic in
Right.
Haiti. And
Right.
he told me actual stories. He once he knew that I wasn't going to make fun of him, he told
Yeah.
me things he had seen that were just normal in Haiti.
Yeah.
Then he went on to say that, he said, I'm driving professors all the time from Harvard, MIT, et cetera. And when they find out I'm Haitian, if they ever ask about voodoo, I'll tell them, I don't know, sorry, my computer fell. That was weird.
Here we
That
are.
was very weird.
Woo, 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 woo.
Yeah. He said, I'll tell them about the things I've seen, and they
Yeah.
just laugh.
Right.
And
Right.
he ended up telling me that he was planning to take his son when his son turned 14. He was going to take him to Haiti so he could see that this stuff is real. So you're growing
Yeah.
up in Boston, but they're living a delusion. This stuff is real. I think, Kale, that we're living on the fumes of the spiritual protection that
Right.
Christianity cleared out.
Right.
But as you say, it's nature hates a vacuum, and so does supernature.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly how I'm seeing this. That there's this, and so then to tie it to the psychedelic conversation, because I do believe that this is a conversation that is not going to go away. I mean,
Right.
everybody I talk about, I talk fairly regularly via direct messages with our friend Paul Vanderklay, pastor out in Sacramento. And he's been really deeply interested in sort of sorting out what's going on with the Jordan Peterson phenomena and spirituality and miracles and all this sort of stuff. And anyway, he says that every time he tries to have a conversation, somebody brings up psychedelics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so he's tuned into it. But so what do you think people are experiencing when they have a trip, Rod?
No, I can tell you because it happened to me.
Mhm.
I revealed to Andrew Sullivan on his
Yeah.
podcast recently that because I don't want to be a hypocrite about it,
Yeah.
that when I was in college, I tried LSD. I wasn't any kind of religious believer then.
Mhm.
It was my second semester freshman year, 1986. I was really depressed over a girl. What else?
Yeah, of
Drinking
course.
a lot, just so stuck inside my head, listening to the Velvet Underground and
Oh,
sad music.
yeah. Geez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I ended up getting this new roommate, this happy go lucky Jewish hippie from New Orleans, great guy. And he said to me one Mardi Gras weekend, we were both stuck on campus. Everybody else was in New Orleans. He said, "Hey, I've got 2 tabs of acid
Yeah.
LSD. You want to try it?" And at that, he had never done it. And at that point, I was so depressed, I'd put anything in my body.
Sure. Right. Why not? Right.
So yeah, so I said, sure, I'll do it. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand about LSD who've never done it is it's not narcotic. It's not like,
Right. Right.
getting wired on an opioid or something. You're
Hmm.
very lucid, but it
Hmm.
just heightens your senses to an incredible degree, depending on how much you take. And the effect it had on me was I can remember lying there on a bench in the quad at LSU, looking up at the sun coming through the green
Oak
leaves.
trees. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and thinking, God is real. Why have I
Yeah.
been so turned
Wow.
inward on myself in this stupid depression? I'm blind to the beauty of the world and the goodness of the world, a world
Wow.
that is filled with God. Now, when the drug wore off, I went back to normal, but I didn't forget that. And
Hmm.
I did not think ever for a second that this was just a drug-induced hallucination.
Right.
I
Right.
believe that the doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley said, I think he got that from Blake or somebody, but I think the doors of perception opened. Now, what it made me do was to start investigating Christianity more seriously.
Hmm.
It was, in a way, an induced miracle. It
Hmm.
wasn't a real miracle. It was a
Hmm.
drug thing. But if that
Well,
had happened, go ahead.
I would just say, I mean, like, if you posit that such a thing as a miracle can happen, which you and I do, I mean, there's no reason to think that a miracle doesn't happen in some kind of like mechanical or chemical
Right,
way,
right, right.
right? I mean,
Well,
this is what people forget that part of it.
yeah, because I mean, somebody might say some, Cartesian, and most of us modern times are Cartesian, might
Yeah.
say, "Oh no, clearly it was just chemicals. It couldn't have been anything
Hmm.
spiritual." But traditional Christians believe that the body, the soul, and the mind are an organic unity,
Yeah.
and that so if something happens in the mind, if we have a drug that makes a change in the mind, it could mean a hallucination, or it could mean you're seeing something that you can't in the spiritual world you can't normally see. Well, that's what I thought had happened to me, and so I began to do investigate in a serious way Christianity. I started reading Kierkegaard and others.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could say that I stopped doing LSD, but I continued to play around with it just, recreationally, which is really stupid. And the reason I haven't said anything about it in the past is I don't want to encourage anybody to do it. I discourage you from doing it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Nevertheless, I'm it, it did happen to me, and
Hmm.
it did
Hmm.
bring me out of a depression, and it gave me a glimpse into what I think is reality.
Yeah.
The danger there, though, is that, and I'm just so grateful to God that He protected me, and I didn't damage my mind,
Hmm.
or I mean my brain, or myself spiritually. But there are far, far, far too many testimonies of people who have gone heavily into this, who lost it,
Yeah.
spiritually and otherwise.
I remember a time in college, my freshman year in college at LSU as well, um, when I witnessed somebody having a bad trip, and I was pretty scared about it. And I just had this, the hair on your
Mhm.
arms sort of popping up, and so I stayed with the guy, and I was just comforting him and trying to soothe him, but it was enough for me. Like, I don't know, man. I just knew it was real. I know that sounds kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
weird, but I knew it was real, and when I and I think the idea, for, is that it throws open your relevance filters wide open, right?
Yeah.
Because in a normal day-to-day life, you have to filter out all of this information
Right.
all the time just in order to get from your computer to the bathroom and back,
Sure.
right?
That's
And
right.
so what happens with these things is that they artificially just throw everything wide open. If you almost think of it like an aperture on a camera, right?
That's
Throwing
exactly
it
right.
wide open, and of course you start seeing all kinds of things, which was already there, right? It's not like it's like when you pick up your phone or your camera and you throw the aperture wide open, the camera's not seeing anything new, right? It's just,
Mhm,
it's now
mhm.
able to detect what's actually there.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor, because I told the story in that blog post, and I see we're running out of time here on
Yeah,
our short Zoom thing.
that's all right. That's all
I,
right.
I said in the a blog post, I told a story about an Orthodox Christian friend of mine who does not do drugs, but he was
Mhm.
lives in the Northwest. He was persuaded by some friends at a party that, oh no, pot brownies, it'll be
Sure.
mild. He's never done drugs, and it ended up he had a very intense trip. He said he believes it opens up the nous. The nous
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
Orthodox thought is the
Yeah.
spiritual perceptive faculty. He ended up going out of his body, he says, and
Yeah.
ended up at a hellish place. An angel saved him from it and told him, "You're not supposed to be here.
Mm,
You're at a real place, but you didn't come here the right way. There's only one right way to come here, and you didn't do it. You didn't mean to. We know that. You'll be protected this time, but if you come back here, you're on your own." And it taught him a big lesson. And he said this is why he's so worried, as a Christian about what's happening, because
right.
he saw demons and he saw
Well,
people be. Go ahead.
what worries me about this, Rod, is that you're going to get people who listen to this show or watch this show, and they're going to say something to the effect of like, "Oh, well, I've done pot, and I've done LSD," and and to me, that is just not really thinking seriously about what's going on here. Yeah, I have no doubt that you did pot and you didn't have this sort of semi-psychotic experience, but the fact
Yeah.
that somebody can do that has to be
Right.
taken seriously.
Right. I did LSD and I didn't have a
Right,
semi-psychotic experience. It
right,
helped me become a Christian, but
right.
I warn people emphatically, do not do this. Do not
Right.
open that door. I was just lucky.
Yeah, and the line, of course, that you quoted, which is actually from Jung, which is somewhat ironic and funny because we can talk about that in another episode. But beware of unearned wisdom, right? Because
Yeah.
when you were artificially worked into a space where you can experience something which you're not ready to experience, and
Mhm.
every spiritual guru will tell you this, every spiritual director will tell you this, that you have to kind of work your way in a kind of disciplined fashion toward something that is real, because if you're not ready for it, it can unmake you, right?
It's
In
going
a
to
very real
crush
way.
you.
That's right.
Yeah, like the metaphor I use, it's like the difference between take a mystic or some dude who drops acid.
Yeah.
The mystic, you might have very similar experiences, but the mystic has gotten there over a long period of spiritual work, and this is
Right.
a gift from God. The dude who drops acid is probably not ready for it. It's like
Right.
the difference between a guy who becomes a multimillionaire winning the lottery and a guy who
Yep.
makes it over
Yeah.
20 years of hard
Right.
work. The money is the same,
Yeah.
but we know what happens to lottery winners. They tend to destroy their lives. I see that we're running out of time,
Yeah,
Kale.
I just think that's a great. Yeah, we'll wrap it up right here. I think that is a great, illustration. That the lottery winner. I really do think that that's the key. That that you got to be careful about this stuff, because I think, as you're pointing out, as you're seeing, as we're experiencing, this experience is of something real.
It's dangerous.
All
And
right.
don't get nothing on you, especially not no psychedelic juju.
Amen. All right, brother. Take care. Bye bye.
All right, bye.